The wind that evening did not whisper. It roared. Wyoming lay beneath a haze of copper dust, the kind that turned the horizon into fire and choked the breath from anything still trying to live. The road through Dry Hollow was nearly invisible, only a blur of hooves, the fleeting shape of a woman bent low over her horse, dress torn and eyes fixed ahead. Amara Fields had not stopped riding since dawn. The air scalded her lungs, but she didn't dare slow. Behind her, far beyond the ridge, she could still hear him, the man who had called himself her fiancé, whose voice carried like a curse through the wind. Each gust seemed to carry his name after her, Reed. The animal beneath her stumbled, foam at its mouth. She leaned forward, whispering hoarsely, "Just a little more." The words barely made it past cracked lips. In her satchel, the torn marriage contract flapped against the wind, its ink smeared, the seal broken. That was her proof she still belonged to no one. The sun was gone now, swallowed by the storm. Dust clung to her lashes, her skin. She couldn't see the trail anymore, only sense the faint rhythm of hooves beneath her, the wild heartbeat of something refusing to give in. Then, suddenly, a sharp crack, a gunshot behind her. The horse reared, throwing her hard into the dirt. The sound of the shot vanished into the howl of the wind, but her body felt the shock through bone and breath. When she tried to rise, pain flared up her leg, her vision blurred with dust and panic. She crawled toward the dry brush, clutching the satchel to her chest. The storm howled louder, swallowing the shape of the world until only her heartbeat remained. She pressed herself into the hollow of a rock, gasping, half praying. The dust burned her throat raw. When she opened her eyes again, it wasn't darkness she saw, but a faint glow through the storm. A lantern. Then the outline of a man astride a dark horse, shoulders broad beneath a coat stiff with grit. He reined in at the ridge, scanning the ground until his eyes found her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The storm howled between them like an animal. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the dust. No words, just a hand reaching toward her, palm open. Amara hesitated. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but the storm left no direction to flee. And there was something in the man's stillness, no demand, no threat, only quiet resolve that broke through her fear. She took his hand. His grip was rough, solid. He lifted her easily, guiding her toward his horse. When she faltered, he steadied her with a touch at her elbow, firm, careful, as if afraid to cause her pain. The gesture undid her more than the fall itself. They rode through the dust in silence. The storm had thinned to a low growl when the faint outline of a cabin appeared on the hill, smoke struggling from its chimney. The man swung down, helping her from the saddle. Inside, the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. He lit the lantern, its glow spreading across the small room. Bare walls, one chair, a table, and a stone hearth. The simplicity struck her like kindness. He didn't ask questions. He poured water into a tin cup, set it before her. His voice, when it came, was low, husky with disuse. "You're safe here." She wanted to believe him. Her hands trembled as she reached for the cup. His fingers brushed hers for an instant. It was nothing, a brief meeting of skin. But she felt warmth spread through her chest, where only cold had lived. He turned to hang his coat, dust falling in small clouds to the floor. Underneath, his shirt clung damp to his shoulders. The scent of rain and iron filled the room. Amara sank into the chair. The lantern flickered, throwing light over her bruised wrist, the dried mud along her skirt. The man's eyes followed, not with pity, but a quiet understanding. "My name's Wyatt," he said at last. "Wyatt Hale." She nodded faintly. "Amara." He inclined his head as if storing it away, then set another log on the fire. The flames rose, soft but steady, their light drawing the dust from her skin, the cold from her bones. Outside, the wind died to a hush. The storm had passed, leaving only stillness and the sound of two breaths finding rhythm in the same room. For the first time in years, Amara let her shoulders fall. She stared at the dancing light, her mind still running, though her body had stopped. Then, without meaning to, her gaze drifted toward him, toward the man who had appeared in the storm like something summoned by mercy. He was standing by the window, one hand on the frame, watching the dark. His profile caught the firelight, tired, weathered, honest, and when he turned slightly, their eyes met. The air between them held still. No words, only recognition. Two souls who had been running too long, now caught in the same brief shelter. Outside, the prairie lay quiet under the veil of dust. Inside, a small fire burned, and with it, the first fragile flicker of something that neither dared name. Dawn crept over the ridge like a sigh. The storm had left the land rinsed clean. The dust turned to pale mud, the sky washed in blue-gray light. From the small window of Wyatt Hale's cabin, the first breath of morning slid in, touching the rough plank floor, the hearth, and the still figure asleep by the fire. Amara stirred. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The smell of wood smoke and pine filled her lungs, the kind that came from a place long lived in, long silent. Her fingers brushed the wool blanket draped over her shoulders. It was coarse, worn thin in patches, clearly his. She sat up slowly, wincing as her leg throbbed from the fall. On the table lay a cup of water and a folded cloth. Someone had cleaned the cut on her wrist, wrapped it with steady hands. Outside came the sound of an axe, steel biting wood in steady rhythm. The thud echoed through the morning air, sharp, sure, like a heartbeat that refused to falter. She rose, limping to the small window. Through the pale mist, she saw him. Wyatt stood bare-armed in the cold, splitting logs beside the fence. His movements were unhurried, measured. Each strike clean, no wasted effort. Steam rose from his shoulders with the breath of dawn. He paused now and then, scanning the valley below as if measuring the silence. Amara found herself watching longer than she meant to. Something in the steadiness of that rhythm soothed her. The world she had fled had been full of shouting, orders, threats, the constant clatter of a man who needed to own everything he touched. But here, every sound was quiet work. When Wyatt finally came in, the door groaned softly. He carried the scent of cold air and sap. His boots left dark prints across the floor. Seeing her awake, he gave a brief nod and set the wood beside the hearth. "You should eat," he said. His voice was low, edged with the rasp of disuse. On the stove, a pot of porridge steamed. He ladled some into a bowl, slid it toward her. She murmured thanks, though her voice faltered. The spoon trembled in her hand. Wyatt leaned against the counter, watching the fire catch. "You were half frozen when I found you," he said quietly. "The horse didn't make it." Her eyes lowered. "I knew she wouldn't." He waited, not pushing. When she glanced up, she found him studying her, not with suspicion, not with pity, but as one might regard a wild creature that had stumbled into shelter. "Your leg?" "It'll hold," she said, though pain flickered through her face. He moved closer, kneeling without a word. His hand brushed near her ankle but didn't touch. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. His fingers were rough but gentle, tracing the edge of the bruise to see if it swelled. Heat flared through her skin where he worked, not from pain but from the simple, foreign kindness of it. "You'll walk fine," he said after a moment, rising. "Just keep it wrapped for a day or two." "Thank you." Her voice came out, softer than she intended. Wyatt poured himself coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the cold room. He stood by the window, sipping in silence. Amara watched him, her thoughts tangled. Every instinct still told her to flee, but there was nowhere left to run. "Why did you stop?" she asked finally. "In the storm. Most men would have kept riding." He looked over, one brow lifting. "You were standing in the middle of the trail." Her lips curved faintly. "So it was accident then?" He shrugged, a shadow of a smile ghosting across his mouth. "Maybe. Or maybe the storm wanted me there." The quiet between them stretched, but it wasn't empty. The fire cracked. The floor creaked as the wind touched the boards. And in that small space as something gentle began to settle, a truce between two kinds of loneliness. Later, when she tried to wash her plate, he reached past her to take it. Their arms brushed. The moment was small but electric, a tremor that lingered longer than reason allowed. "I'll do that," he said. "It's the least I can—" "You're a guest, Amara." His tone was steady, but his eyes, gray and calm as riverstone, held her still. She stepped back, heartbeat quick. "Then I suppose I'll sit." "Suppose you should." The corner of his mouth lifted again. Barely, but it was the first smile she'd seen from him. Outside, the wind softened. Sunlight broke over the ridge, striking the valley in streaks of gold. Amara sat by the window, wrapping the blanket tighter, her eyes drifting to where he worked by the sink. Sleeves rolled, forearms streaked with wood dust. In that ordinary motion, pouring water, setting dishes aside, she felt a quiet she hadn't known in years. Not safety exactly, not yet, but the faint hum of something that could become it. The day stretched forward like a road not yet taken, and for the first time since the dust began to fall, Amara Fields no longer thought of running. By the time the bruised sky cleared, the valley had returned to its rhythm. Wagons rolled through Red Bluff's main street, chickens clucked behind fences, and the gossip that fed the town found something new to taste. A stranger had been seen on the hill. A woman. Dark-skinned, traveling alone, sheltered by the widower who'd lived like a ghost since his wife died. No one said her name yet, but everyone had an opinion. At the mercantile, Mrs. Pritchard leaned across the counter, whispering to a customer, "He brought her in himself, near dead, they say. And now she's living there? Alone? No preacher? No vows?" By noon, the whispers had taken root. Up on Stone Creek Hill, Amara felt them long before she heard them. It was in the way the air changed when she rode down for supplies, in how voices hushed when she stepped into the store. She tried to meet their eyes, but most looked past her, as if seeing something they shouldn't. The first few days after the storm, Wyatt had kept to his usual silence. He rose with the dawn, worked with wood until dusk, spoke only when needed. Yet somehow, the quiet between them had shifted. It was no longer the emptiness of strangers, but the stillness of two lives finding a rhythm side by side. When she swept the floor, he moved the chair aside without asking. When he repaired the broken window frame, She stood close enough to hand him the nails. Sometimes their fingers brushed, light, brief, unspoken, but the contact lingered longer than words could. One morning, she caught him watching her from the doorway as she poured water into the basin. Sunlight streamed across her face. Her hair, still damp from washing, clung to her neck. She froze, heart thudding. Wyatt looked away first, but not before she saw something in his eyes. Not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. The next day, when she went into town, that small moment seemed to echo in every pair of eyes that followed her. She heard it whispered on the boardwalk. The widower's gone soft, took in one of them colored girls. Another voice. Living together, no vows. Sin under his roof, that's what it is. Each word stung like grit in an open wound. At the well, she met Mrs. Holbrook, the innkeeper, who paused just long enough to look her over. "You'd best keep your head high, girl," she said, voice sharp but not unkind. "This valley's quick to judge what it don't understand." Amara nodded, forcing a smile. "I only mean to work, ma'am, and to repay what kindness he's shown." "That may be," Mrs. Holbrook said, "but kindness can turn to talk, and talk can turn to ruin." That night, Amara sat by the fire, needle and thread in hand, mending a torn curtain. Wyatt worked beside her, carving a length of wood into shape. The rhythm of the knife against grain was steady, patient. When she pricked her finger, he looked up instantly. "You all right?" She nodded, sucking at the small wound, embarrassed. "It's nothing." He rose, crossed to her side and took her hand before she could pull away. The calloused warmth of his fingers closed around hers, turning her palm to the light. The cut was shallow, but he studied it as if it were something fragile and precious. "Next time, use the thimble," he said softly. Her breath caught. "You sound like you've mended more curtains than I have." His mouth curved slightly. "I've had practice patching things that tear." Their eyes met, steady, searching, and the world outside seemed to fall quiet again. After a moment, he released her hand, returning to his chair. But the air between them was different now. The warmth of his touch lingered long after the fire settled to embers. Outside, the night stretched still and starless. From far below the hill, faint lights flickered, the homes of those who whispered and judged. Yet up here, in the quiet cabin, Amara felt something shift within her. She wasn't safe yet, not in the way the word promised, but she was no longer afraid. The next morning, she rose before sunrise and carried a pail to the creek. Mist clung low, soft as breath. When she looked back, Wyatt was at the doorway, watching her. He raised a hand in greeting, simple, wordless, and she found herself smiling. The valley might talk. It always would. But on that hill, where the wind carried no judgment, Amara Fields began to find a kind of peace she'd never known. Not silence, not solitude, but the quiet companionship of two souls the world had already forgotten. And from that quiet, something small and certain began to grow. Not yet love, not yet trust, but the fragile beginning of both. The days that followed drifted softly, like wind through tall grass. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hush that seemed to settle even inside their bones. Life on Stone Creek Hill found its rhythm again. Slow, patient, wordless. Amara woke each morning before Wyatt, stirring the fire back to life. The smell of coffee filled the cabin, mingling with the sharp scent of pine. She found comfort in these small rituals, sweeping the dust from the floor, hanging the blanket to dry, folding what few clothes she owned. The work gave her a rhythm her heart could follow. Wyatt moved with the steadiness of someone long accustomed to solitude. He spoke little, but his presence filled the space. When he returned from the woods, the door always creaked the same way, his boots leaving a trail of earth across the floorboards. He'd nod once to her, a quiet greeting, before setting down his tools and washing at the basin. Some afternoons, when he worked outside mending fences, she would sit by the window with her mending. From there, she could see the hill roll down toward the valley, gold light on scrub grass, the faint silver thread of the creek. The sight of him moving across that field, tall and silent, steadied her more than she cared to admit. There was peace in their distance, and yet it was the small moments that pulled them closer. One morning, she stepped out to hang the washing. The wind had picked up. A sheet slipped from her grasp, flying across the yard. Before she could chase it, Wyatt appeared, catching the cloth mid-air. The corner brushed against his face. Dust streaked his brow. He handed it back without a word, but when their fingers met, the touch lingered. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she couldn't look away. He cleared his throat, eyes darting toward the horizon. "Storm's turning east," he said. She nodded, still holding the sheet to her chest. "Good," was all she managed. After that, their silence felt different, heavier in the air, but gentler somehow. In the evenings, they ate by the fire. She cooked simple meals, beans, cornbread, whatever could be gathered from the sparse garden behind the cabin. Wyatt always waited for her to take the first bite, as though some old instinct of courtesy had never left him. When he thanked her, his voice was so quiet it felt like prayer. Sometimes he asked about the world she'd left. She never gave full answers, just fragments. A place that didn't forgive. A house too fine to feel like home. A man who thought love was ownership. He didn't press, only listened, his eyes fixed on the fire, his hands still. In return, she learned his story through silence more than words. The way his gaze lingered on the wooden frame by the hearth told her what he'd lost. Once, when she touched the carving knife he left on the table, he said softly, "It was hers, Clara's." Then nothing more. The quiet between them deepened. Late one afternoon, rain began to fall again. Not a storm this time, only a soft patter that blurred the line between sky and earth. They stood at the doorway watching. The smell of wet pine drifted in, the sound of water gentle against the roof. Amara hugged her shawl tighter. "I thought I'd never like the sound of rain again," she murmured. Wyatt glanced at her. "Why?" "Because the last time it rained, I was running." He nodded slowly. "Then let this be a different rain." She looked up at him, really looked. The lines on his face caught the dim light, his eyes the color of the storm itself. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile and new. Inside, the fire crackled low. She turned back toward it, but he stayed beside her, the faint warmth of his arm near hers. Neither moved. When the rain stopped, the valley shone in a thin mist, soft and silver. Amara exhaled, a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That night, as she lay awake, she heard him move in the next room, the scrape of a chair, the faint thud of wood being stacked. It should have been ordinary, Yet to her it sounded like the rhythm of safety. She turned her face toward the faint glow of the dying fire and whispered, "Thank you," though she knew he couldn't hear. Up on Stone Creek Hill, under the quiet night sky, two hearts, long hidden behind grief and fear, had begun to learn the shape of peace. And in that peace something else took root, gentle as the rain that had washed the dust away. The morning of the market broke bright and brittle, sunlight glinting off puddles left from last night's rain. Amara had been awake since dawn, kneading dough, her thoughts restless. The cabin's stores were running low. Wyatt needed nails, flour, salt. When he mentioned riding into Red Bluff, she offered to come. He hesitated, but didn't argue. "All right," he said at last. "Stay close." They rode down together, the road winding between the hills, soft mud clinging to the horses' hooves. The air smelled of wet grass and earth, the sky clean after days of dust. For a while it almost felt ordinary, until they reached town. The square was alive with color and noise, wagons stacked with apples, bolts of calico, piles of dried corn. Music drifted from a fiddler's corner. Children darted between the stalls. But as soon as Amara stepped down from her horse, the hum around her changed. Eyes turned. Conversations broke. She felt them before she saw them, the looks that sliced sharper than wind. Wyatt set his hat low and took the lead toward the blacksmith's. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "I'm trying," she murmured. They moved from stall to stall, gathering what they needed. The shopkeepers' smiles were thin, their politeness rehearsed. One woman refused to take Amara's coin until Wyatt nodded his approval. Another dropped the change on the counter rather than into her hand. Amara kept her gaze steady, back straight. She had known worse than this. Yet shame rose hot in her throat. Not for herself, but for the man beside her who bore their stares in silence. When they reached the center of the square, the sound of hooves shattered the uneasy quiet. 4 riders thundered in, scattering chickens and dust. At their head was a man she recognized even before her mind could name him. Reed. His face was the same, handsome in a cruel, polished way. He swung down from his horse, boots striking hard against the dirt. The crowd turned to watch. "Well, if it isn't my runaway bride," he said loudly, spreading his arms. "Come back for the vows you forgot, Amara." The laughter that followed was sharp, brittle. She froze, every nerve screaming to run. Her hands trembled against her skirt, but Wyatt's voice came low beside her, steady as bedrock. "Don't move." Reed stepped closer, circling her like a predator tasting victory. "She left me in the middle of the ceremony," he told the onlookers, voice oozing charm. "Poor thing's not right in the head. I came to bring her home, for her own good." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, eager for scandal. Others simply watched, silent and hungry. Amara found her voice at last. "You never had a right to call me yours." Reed's smile thinned. "Still ungrateful." He turned to the crowd. "You all see what I've suffered? Months of shame because this woman can't tell gratitude from madness." He reached for her arm. She flinched back, but before his hand could touch her, Wyatt moved. In one stride, he was between them. His hand gripped Reed's wrist with quiet force. "That's enough," Reed sneered. "And who are you to tell me what's enough?" Wyatt's answer came low, but it carried over the square. "I'm the man she chose to stand beside. That's who." The words struck like thunder. The square fell silent, Every whisper swallowed. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Reed's face flushed crimson. "Chose?" he spat. "You mean you took what isn't yours?" Wyatt didn't flinch. "She belongs to no one, but she's safe with me." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then someone muttered, "Let him be, Reed." Another voice, "He's right. You've said enough." The crowd began to shift, turning against the man who had once charmed them. Reed's jaw tightened. He yanked his wrist free and backed toward his horse. "You'll regret this, Hale," he hissed. "You'll regret every damn word." He swung into the saddle, eyes burning, and galloped out of the square. The echo of hooves faded, leaving only the low hum of murmured disbelief. Amara stood trembling, her breath shallow. The crowd watched, waiting for her to break. But she didn't. She lifted her chin instead, met their eyes one by one, and turned toward the waiting horse. Wyatt followed close, his hand hovering near her back. Not touching. Not yet. But close enough to anchor her. As they rode out of Red Bluff, the wind carried fragments of the moment back into silence. The valley below shimmered with light, the creek flashing silver through the grass. Only when they reached the ridge did Amara finally speak. "You shouldn't have done that." He glanced at her. "And if I hadn't?" She looked away, throat tight. "Then I'd still be standing there, alone." The words hung between them, soft and bare. Wyatt's hand brushed hers on the reins, a fleeting touch that said more than either dared. Behind them, Red Bluff buzzed with fresh whispers, but up on the hill, the wind felt clean again. That night, the wind was still carrying dust from the valley, but inside the cabin, everything had gone quiet. The fire had burned low, a deep orange glow pulsing in the hearth, like the slow beat of a heart. Amara sat by the window, the light tracing her face in soft gold. Her hair fell loose from its pins, and her dress, damp at the hem, clung faintly where rain had touched it. Wyatt stood at the table, shoulders rigid, hands flat against the wood, as if to steady something inside him. Neither spoke. The silence between them was thicker than any storm. Finally, she whispered, "They looked at me like I was a sin made of flesh." Wyatt turned, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "Let them look. They only see what they understand. I see what they don't." Her breath hitched. "And what is that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the floor slowly, the boards creaking beneath his boots. When he stopped before her, the lamplight climbed the planes of his face, the scar near his jaw, the rough stubble, the quiet exhaustion of a man who had lived too long in silence. "You," he said softly. "I see you." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the fire's warmth breathing between them. Then, as if pulled by something older than fear, Amara reached up and brushed his sleeve, the barest touch, but it broke the air open. He lifted her hand, fingers tracing the small callus near her thumb. His touch was careful, reverent, as though he were holding a secret the world could not be trusted with. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering in the dim light. "I don't know how to be seen without trembling." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then let me be still enough for both of us." The fire cracked. Slowly, he bent toward her. The first brush of his lips was unsure, a question more than a claim. Her breath caught against his, the nearness of him dissolving the distance that had kept her alive for so long. The second kiss came softer, steadier. Her hands found the fabric at his shoulders, her fingers curling there as though to prove he was real. The scent of rain clung to his hair, the faint musk of wood and smoke rising between them. When he drew back, their foreheads stayed pressed together. Her pulse beat against his chest. His hand still rested lightly against the small of her back. No words passed. They didn't need any. The firelight spoke for them, flickering across skin, across breath, across the fragile space where fear had once lived. She felt his heart, heavy and sure beneath her palm, and something inside her finally loosened. The years of running, of hiding, of shrinking to fit into someone else's shadow, all of it slipped away like ash. He touched her face again, thumb grazing her cheekbone, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe now, Amara." Her reply came like a sigh. "Then let me stay." He exhaled, and the sound trembled between them, half relief, half surrender. When he kissed her again, it wasn't the fire that warmed her, but the certainty in the way his hand found hers, fingers interlacing, steady, deliberate. The flames dipped lower, leaving the room wrapped in amber dusk. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a hymn. Inside, their breaths fell into one rhythm, quiet, patient, whole. Later, when the fire was nearly out, Amara rested her head against his chest. His arm came around her shoulders, drawing her close until her heartbeat slowed to match his. The night didn't need words to mark its meaning. It was enough that they had crossed the distance between fear and belonging. And there, in the hush of Stone Creek Hill, two people once broken by the world found the courage to stop running, not into passion, but into peace. The morning came pale and cold. Dew clung to the grass like glass beads, and the first light of day spilled quietly across the valley. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned to embers. The stillness that lingered wasn't only silence, it was the tender hush that follows truth. Amara woke first. Wyatt was by the hearth, shirt half-buttoned, coaxing the fire back to life. When he turned, his eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat the world held only that small exchange, a look too honest to need words. Neither spoke of the night before. They didn't have to. Something had changed, and both knew it. When the sun rose higher, Wyatt saddled the horses. "We'll need flour and salt again," he said quietly. "Might as well head to town." She hesitated. "After yesterday?" He paused, adjusting the strap. "They'll talk whether we go or stay." So they went. Red Bluff looked the same as always, the dry wind, the creak of porch boards, the church bell marking time. But as soon as they stepped into view, every sound seemed to bend toward them. Men leaned on railings, women stopped mid-step. Words passed beneath breaths, quick as snakes in the grass. Amara kept her head high, though her heart pounded. Wyatt's steady presence beside her was the only thing holding her upright. At the general store, conversation stopped entirely. The clerk, Mr. Dobbs, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Hale," he said. "And Miss Fields." Amara nodded, her voice soft. "Good morning." He measured out the flour without meeting her gaze. "Heard you two been keeping close company up on that hill." Wyatt's tone was even. "That's right." Dobbs coughed. "Some folks might say it ain't proper." Wyatt's gray eyes fixed on him, calm but iron beneath. Some folks forget propriety's got nothing to do with decency. The man looked away. The bag of flour thumped onto the counter harder than necessary. That'll be $1.20. Amara reached for her purse, but Wyatt laid a hand gently over hers. I've got it, he said. The warmth of his touch was brief but grounding. When they left the store, the murmurs followed, quiet, venomous, insistent. By afternoon, the whispers had spread beyond the square. At the saloon, laughter spilled into the street. Widower Hales found himself a new wife, someone said loudly, and didn't bother the preacher about it. Another voice answered, a colored woman, too. Lord help him. Wyatt didn't react, but Amara could see the tightness in his jaw. She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. Let them, she whispered. He looked down at her, and some of the tension eased. They've never seen courage before, he said quietly. They mistake it for sin. That night, back at the cabin, the valley below glimmered with lantern light, tiny fires of rumor spreading one by one. Amara sat by the window, watching them. They'll never stop talking, will they? She asked. Maybe not, Wyatt said. He was behind her, mending the handle of a chair. But time's got a way of wearing out even the loudest voices. She turned to him. And if it doesn't? He met her gaze. Then we keep living anyway. The quiet stretched. The only sound was the scrape of wood, the faint hiss of the fire. Then Amara rose, crossing the room. She laid a hand on his shoulder, gentle, steady. You don't have to bear it alone, she said. He set down the tool and covered her hand with his. I'm not. Their fingers interlaced, rough against soft. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the night pressing close around them. Outside, wind swept through the pines. Inside, their small world held firm. When Amara finally spoke, her voice trembled only slightly. You gave them truth, Wyatt. But truth makes enemies before it earns peace. He nodded, eyes still on the fire. Then we'll wait for peace together. In the stillness that followed, she leaned against him, her head fitting beneath his chin. The flames cast them in one long shadow, two figures bound not by vows or the approval of others, but by the quiet defiance of love itself. Beyond the hill, Red Bluff whispered. But the cabin stayed warm, a single circle of light against the dark. And in that warmth, they began to learn the difference between being seen and being known. The afternoon sky hung low over Stone Creek, swollen with gray. The wind had a strange stillness to it, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Wyatt had gone to repair the fence near the orchard. Amara knelt in the garden, coaxing new shoots from the damp soil. For weeks they had lived between calm and rumor, between peace and the faint rustle of something darker waiting just beyond the ridge. When the first echo of hooves reached her ears, she thought it was the wind. Then she heard it again, steady, deliberate, closer. Her hands froze above the seedlings. Wyatt straightened on the hill, shading his eyes. A single rider broke through the line of trees. Even from a distance, the stance, the cut of the coat, the arrogance in the way the reins were held. He knew the name before his mind formed it. Reed. The man reined in hard near the gate, dust curling around the horse's legs. His face was ruddy from drink and anger, his eyes glittering with a fever that came from more than rage. "Thought you could steal from me, Hale?" he shouted, voice harsh against the quiet. "Thought you could hide her here forever?" Amara rose slowly, the garden spade still in her hand. You should leave, she said, her voice low, steady. Reed laughed, a sound without humor. You think this ends because you ran? You think a piece of paper changes what's mine? Wyatt descended the slope, steps measured, each one heavy with control. There's nothing of yours here. Reed swung down from his horse, boots crunching over the gravel. You say that now, he sneered, but the town still remembers the truth I gave them. All I need's a preacher and a rope to make it right again. Amara's breath hitched. You have no truth left, she said. Only lies to keep your pride alive. Reed's hand snapped toward her before either of them could move. His grip found her wrist, the same wrist that once bore his bruise. Pain flared white. Wyatt was there in a heartbeat. His hand closed around Reed's arm, prying it free with a force that cracked bone from bone. Let her go, he said, low, steady, and more dangerous than a shout. Reed staggered back, clutching his wrist, fury blazing. You'll hang for this, Hale. Wyatt's eyes didn't waver. Maybe, but not before I make sure you never touch her again. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the wind seemed to hold still. Then Reed lunged. The struggle was brief and brutal. The two men crashed into the dirt, the thud of fists drowned by the roaring in Amara's ears. She saw Wyatt's jaw tighten, saw Reed reach for something inside his coat. A flash of metal. Wyatt! She screamed. He turned just as the pistol came free. The gun fired, once, then fell into the mud. Smoke curled upward like a prayer. Reed dropped to his knees, clutching his arm. Blood seeped through his sleeve, not mortal, but enough to drain the fight from his eyes. You'll regret this, he hissed. Again, weaker now, voice breaking under its own venom. Wyatt stood above him, chest heaving. Not as much as I'd regret doing nothing. Reed's horse spooked, rearing back. With a muttered curse, he caught the reins and mounted, cradling his wounded arm. This isn't over, he spat, before spurring the animal hard down the road. The sound of hooves faded until there was only the wind again. Amara stood frozen, breath shallow. The spade slipped from her hand. Wyatt crossed to her, his hand finding her shoulder. You're hurt? She shook her head, though tears streaked the dust on her face. No, but I thought... He drew her in before she could finish. Her hands clutched the fabric at his chest, the smell of earth and gunpowder thick in the air. His voice came rough against her hair. He's gone now. He won't come back. Her heart pounded against him, wild, uneven. He'll always come back, Wyatt. Men like him don't stop. They're stopped. Wyatt didn't argue. His hand found hers, lifted it to his lips. The gesture was quiet, almost reverent. Then we stop him, with truth. Later, when she gathered the fallen pistol from the dirt, she noticed something beside it. A small, leather-bound ledger that must have fallen from Reed's coat. Its cover was scuffed, edges worn, but when she opened it, pages of numbers and signatures filled the inside. Her brow furrowed. What is this? Wyatt looked down at it, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Proof, he said, enough to bring him down for good. The sun broke through the clouds then, scattering the gray. For a moment, light spilled across the cabin, across their faces streaked with dirt and fear. Neither smiled, but both understood. This was the turning point. The storm was no longer something to flee. It was something they were ready to face. Morning came gray and windless, the kind of silence that holds its breath before a storm breaks. Amara stood by the window, the small ledger open in her hands. The ink had bled from rain, but the numbers remained clear, amounts too large to explain, signatures too neat to be honest. Every page whispered deceit. Every line was a thread that could pull Reed's world apart. Wyatt sat at the table rolling a cigarette he had no intention of lighting. His eyes stayed fixed on the book. "If what's written there is true," he said finally, "Reed's been stealing from more than just the bank. He's been robbing every soul in Red Bluff." Amara closed the ledger, her fingers trembling slightly. "Then we take it to the marshal." He looked at her, slow and thoughtful. "That means bringing the town into it, standing up there, naming him before everyone. You'll be the one they question." "I've lived my life under their judgment," she said quietly. "Let them hear the truth this time." Wyatt nodded once, the decision already settled between them. By noon, clouds rolled low over the valley, dark as bruises. They saddled the horses and rode toward town, the wind kicking dust around their boots. Each mile tightened Amara's chest, but Wyatt's presence beside her steadied the rhythm of her heart. When they reached Red Bluff, the square was already crowded. Word had spread. Reed had returned earlier that morning, claiming he'd been attacked, nursing his wound as proof of Wyatt's guilt. The saloon doors swung with talk and tension. The marshal stood on the steps of the old courthouse, gray-bearded and watchful. When Wyatt and Amara dismounted, his gaze flicked to the ledger in her hands. "What's this about?" Wyatt's voice was calm. "About a man who's used this town like his own purse." A murmur ran through the crowd. Reed stepped forward, his arm still bound in a sling, his smile brittle. "More lies from the hill?" he drawled. "They'll say anything to clean their names." Amara stepped past Wyatt then, her voice carrying, though it shook. "I've no name that needs cleaning, only one that's been dragged through dirt long enough." She held up the ledger. "These are your books, Mr. Reed. Loans that never existed. Transfers under names that died years ago." Gasps broke through the crowd. The marshal took the ledger, flipping through its pages. Each turn of the paper made Reed's smile fade another shade. Wyatt spoke again, steady and unyielding. "You've hidden behind wealth and rumor, but paper keeps its own memory." Reed's composure cracked. "You think they'll believe her over me? A runaway woman and a broken carpenter?" The marshal closed the book with a thud. "They'll believe the numbers." His eyes lifted, cold as iron. "And they'll believe the signatures match your own." Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. Reed lunged forward, but the deputies were faster ins. A flurry of dust and curses. His arms were wrenched behind him, the clink of irons ringing sharp. He twisted to look at Amara, hatred and disbelief warring in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You'll never belong here." Amara met his gaze, her voice calm. "I already do." The marshal nodded to the deputies. "Take him to Cheyenne. He'll answer there." As they led Reed away, murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Not the venomous whispers of months past, but softer ones, uncertain, shifting. A woman near the bakery crossed herself. A man tipped his hat to Amara as she passed. The tide had turned, slowly but unmistakably. When the square emptied, Amara stood in the sunlight, the weight of months lifting from her shoulders. Wyatt came to her side, eyes tracing her face as if seeing her for the first time, without fear shadowing it. "It's done," he said. She exhaled, tears pricking her eyes. "I never thought I'd live to see a day like this." Wyatt's voice softened. "You didn't just live to see it. You made it happen." She looked at him then, truly looked. The man who had stood against a town, against silence itself. And in that moment, she understood that justice wasn't only the fall of a cruel man, it was the small, quiet act of being believed. They walked back through the empty square, their hands brushing once, then staying. The wind carried the last of the dust away. By evening, the sky over Red Bluff broke open, light spilling gold over the roofs. The hills shone clean after the storm, and on that hill above the valley, where a woman once fled in fear, two figures rode home together, no longer fugitives, but the keepers of their own truth. Autumn arrived early that year, painting the valley in rust and gold. The air carried the scent of apples and hay, and the town of Red Bluff, so long divided by whispers, came together for the annual harvest fair. Banners of burlap and faded ribbons stretched from one porch to the next. Children darted through the dust with paper windmills in hand, their laughter tangling with the tune of a fiddle drifting down the main street. Wyatt led the wagon into town with sacks of grain stacked in the back, the horses snorting in the crisp air. Beside him, Amara held a basket of spiced bread and wildflower honey, her small offering to a place that had once turned its back on her. Her heart beat faster with every jolt of the wheels. The fair had always been the town's proudest day, and this was the first time she had come without fear. "Stay close," Wyatt said quietly as he pulled the reins. "Old habits die slower than rumors." She smiled faintly. "Then let's give them something new to talk about." They stepped down together. Heads turned, some curious, some hesitant, others carrying the weight of what they'd seen in the courthouse weeks before. Reed's name had disappeared from conversation, swallowed by the justice that followed him out of town. Yet gossip was a stubborn weed. It lingered. Still, when Mrs. Holbrook, the innkeeper, waved from her booth, Amara's chest eased a little. "You came," the older woman said, pressing a warm hand over hers. "I was hoping you would. I thought maybe it was time." "It's past time, dear," Mrs. Holbrook said, and smiled. The fair unfolded in colors and noise, the creak of wagon wheels, the rhythm of boots tapping to music, the calls of vendors selling cider and roasted corn. Wyatt entered a small contest of carpenters, his hands steady as he shaped a length of pine into something smooth and true. Amara watched from the edge of the square, sunlight catching the curve of her face. Then, amid the cheer, a sudden cry sliced through the sound. "Look out!" someone shouted. A wagon loaded with barley barrels had broken free from its hitch at the top of the sloping road. The horse bolted, eyes wild, dragging the empty traces behind it. The wagon thundered down toward the square, gathering speed. In its path, a small boy, no more than 6, stood frozen, a wooden toy dropped beside him. The crowd gasped, but no one moved fast enough. Amara did. Her basket fell to the ground as she ran, skirts whipping around her legs. She threw herself forward, hands seizing the wagon's side rail just as it lurched past. Her boots skidded in the dirt, pain shooting up her arms as she pulled hard on the wheel, fighting the weight of it. The barrels rocked, threatening to spill, but her grip held. "Hold the horse!" she shouted, though her voice barely reached over the chaos. Wyatt was already there. He leapt into the road, catching the runaway reins, digging his heels into the ground. Together, their strength met the motion head-on. The wagon jolted, shuddered, and stopped inches from the boy. Silence fell. Then, the mother rushed forward, clutching her child to her chest. "God bless you," she cried, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. You saved him! Amara staggered back, breathless, hands raw and trembling. The square, moments ago loud with laughter, now hummed with astonishment. Faces she had once feared to meet now turned toward her in awe. Mrs. Holbrook was the first to clap, her strong hands cutting through the silence. Then others followed, hesitant at first, then rising, echoing, spreading across the square until applause filled the air. Amara's eyes stung. She tried to speak, but words dissolved into a single shaking breath. Wyatt stepped forward, his palm finding the small of her back. "Easy now," he murmured. The crowd parted as the boy approached her, clutching his mother's hand. "Thank you, Miss Amara," he said shyly, pressing a crumpled wildflower into her palm. She knelt, smiling through the tears she could no longer hold back. "Keep it, little one. You were brave today." "No, ma'am," he said, voice small but sure. "You were." By evening, the fair had returned to its rhythm, music and laughter once more. But something fundamental had shifted. When Amara walked through the crowd, people no longer looked away. Some tipped their hats. Others offered soft nods or shy smiles. Even Mr. Dobbs, the store clerk, stepped forward to say, "You done the town proud, Miss Fields." As twilight deepened, Wyatt found her near the lantern-lit stalls. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, her fingers brushing the bruise on her wrist where the wagon's handle had caught her. "I think, for the first time, I am." He looked at her a long moment, then smiled, a small, quiet thing that reached his eyes. "They finally saw what I saw all along." She exhaled softly, turning toward the glow of the square where laughter carried on the wind. "Maybe that's all I ever wanted, to be seen for more than what they feared." "Then you've done it," he said. The bells from the church rang out, low and steady, marking the close of the fair. Around them, lanterns flickered like a constellation brought to earth. For the first time, Amara didn't feel like an outsider watching from the edges. She stood among them, belonged among them. And in the heart of that autumn evening, as leaves fell like quiet blessings over the square, Red Bluff finally looked upon her not with judgment, but with gratitude. The first snow came early that year. It fell soft and steady over the hills of Stone Creek, blanketing the earth in quiet. The valley slept under white silence, and for the first time in many seasons, Amara felt no fear when she looked out across the land. Wyatt stood on the porch, his breath clouding in the cold. The fence he had built last autumn stood firm against the wind. From the small window behind him, the faint laughter of children spilled into the air, the sound of pencils scratching, of words being born. Inside the cabin, benches of pine stood in neat rows, their edges worn smooth by Wyatt's hands. On the wall hung a slate board, its surface dark and waiting. The sign above the doorway, carved from an old wagon plank, read, "Stone Creek School, for every child who wishes to learn." It was Amara's idea. Each morning, a handful of children from the valley trudged up the hill with books tucked under their arms, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Some were the sons of ranchers, some the daughters of housemaids. A few were orphans who had nowhere else to go. None of it mattered. Inside the cabin, all were equals beneath Amara's calm gaze. She taught them letters and numbers, but more than that, she taught them kindness, the same quiet grace that had saved her life. "Words," she often said, "are like seeds. Plant them carefully, and they'll grow even through stone." Wyatt listened from the porch most days, carving small wooden toys for the youngest ones. When lessons ended, the children would crowd around him, laughing as he shaped horses and tiny wagons from scraps of oak. It became a rhythm. Her voice inside, his hands outside, and the steady heartbeat of a home growing between them. By late afternoon, when the sun turned copper behind the hills, the children would leave in pairs, their voices fading down the snowy path. Then the house would fall into that tender hush only winter can hold. One evening, Amara lingered by the window long after the last child had gone. Snow drifted past the glass, catching light from the fire. Wyatt was at the table, mending the handle of a desk that had split in the cold. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, his movements unhurried. "You've built a place that breathes," she said softly. He looked up, brow lifting slightly. "You did that." She shook her head. "No, I only dreamed it. You gave it walls." He smiled faintly, that slow, rare smile that always made her chest ache a little. "Then I suppose it's ours." She crossed the room, her steps quiet over the wooden floor. The firelight trembled on their faces. "It still feels like a dream," she whispered. "To wake up and hear laughter instead of whispers." Wyatt reached for her hand. His fingers, rough from work, closed around hers with a gentleness that never ceased to surprise her. "You turned their eyes," he said, "not by shouting louder, but by standing still." Her eyes glistened. "Do you think it'll last? This peace?" He hesitated, not from doubt, but from care. "Peace doesn't stay on its own," he said. "You have to keep tending it, like a fire, like a field." She leaned closer, her head resting against his shoulder. "Then we'll tend it together." They stood like that for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the hearth and the soft sweep of snow outside. The light moved across the room, touching the blackboard, the books, the rows of small chairs, each one a promise that life could grow even from ruin. Later, as night deepened, Amara lit a single lamp in the window, its glow casting a golden square into the dark. From below the valley, it must have looked like a star had come to rest on the hill. Children would tell stories of it. The school that shone through the storm, where the teacher with the gentle eyes taught them not just words, but worth. And sometimes, when the wind was soft enough, one could hear her voice through the snow, steady, calm, shaping futures with each breath. Wyatt would be there, always, in the doorway, in the quiet, in the belonging they had built from the ashes of exile. That winter, Stone Creek did not feel like a place on a map. It felt like home. Many winters passed, and the snows of Stone Creek softened into gentle memory. Seasons turned, each one leaving its quiet mark. The laughter of children, the scrape of chalk on slate, the whisper of wind along the windows of the small school that had once been only a dream. Now it bore her name. The carved sign above the doorway read, "Amara Fields Schoolhouse." People still said it aloud with a kind of reverence. Some called it the school on the hill. Others, more fondly, called it the House of Light. Each morning, the path from the valley filled with footsteps, children trudging up through the frost, cheeks flushed, books clutched tight. The youngest ones always stopped by the fence, where Wyatt Hale, hair silver now, stood mending posts or carving toys as he always had. He would lift his hand in greeting, and they would wave back before running inside to where Amara waited. Her hair was streaked with gray, gathered in the same loose knot she had worn since the day they met. Her voice had softened, but carried the same steady warmth that could turn a cold room gentle. Their eldest daughter, Clara, helped with the lessons now, graceful, bright-eyed, with her mother's calm and her father's quiet strength. Their son, Eli, had his father's hands, always building, fixing, shaping the world into something lasting. And their youngest, Ruth, spent mornings in the doorway, humming as she watched the light move across the floorboards. The cabin, once a refuge from fear, had grown into something larger, a home woven through with learning and laughter. The blackboard had been replaced twice. The desks, worn smooth by generations of small hands, held initials carved into the wood, the proof of time passing kindly. On Sundays, the valley folk would gather outside the schoolhouse, bringing baskets of food and stories to share. It no longer mattered that Amara had once been the woman they whispered about. To them now, she was the one who had taught their children to read, to write, to believe they were more than the soil beneath their feet. One afternoon, long after the lessons had ended, Amara stood by the window, watching the children descend the hill. The light of late autumn brushed everything in gold, the fences, the worn path, the trees stripped bare by wind. Wyatt came up behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "They've named the new library after you," he said quietly. "You'll be on a plaque now, right next to the mayor's." She smiled, eyes soft. "It doesn't need my name to remember what we built." He studied her a moment, his expression caught between pride and wonder. "Still," he said, "it's something, isn't it? You once ran from a world that didn't see you, and now the world looks up to the hill where you stand." She turned to him, her hand finding his. The wrinkles between them felt like the lines of a map they had drawn together. Years, storms, and small mercies all etched into skin. "I didn't climb it alone," she whispered. Outside, Clara's laughter drifted from the yard, mingling with Eli's deep voice and the distant bark of the farm dog chasing Ruth through the dry leaves. The sound was life itself, imperfect, fleeting, whole. Wyatt's arm came around her waist, drawing her close as they stepped onto the porch. From there they could see the entire valley, the roofs of Red Bluff glinting under the slant of afternoon sun, the river winding pale blue through fields readying for rest. "Do you remember the first winter?" Wyatt asked, his voice low. Amara nodded. "The night we lit the lamp in the window." "It's still there," he said. She followed his gaze. Inside the schoolhouse, the old lamp glowed faintly against the gathering dusk. Its flame wavered, gold and steady, like the heart of everything they had made. The sun dipped lower, brushing the hills with amber. Shadows stretched long across the snow. The sound of their children's laughter softened into distance, carried on the wind. Amara leaned her head against Wyatt's shoulder. "When I came here, I thought I'd lost everything that made life worth living." He smiled, eyes on the horizon. "And now?" She breathed in the scent of cedar and smoke. "Now I know it just hadn't found me yet." He turned to her then, and for a long, quiet moment, they simply stood together, two souls who had once wandered through fear and found home in each other's light. The sun sank behind the ridge, setting the sky aflame with gold and rose. Its glow spilled over the schoolhouse, over the cabin porch, over the two figures standing side by side. And when the last light touched the roof, it lingered, as if even the day itself refused to let go. On that hill, under the wide western sky, love had finally taken root. It needed no promise, no vow, no witness, only the steady rhythm of hearts that had endured and the quiet grace of a house filled with light.